Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into something really important, how Gen Z sees war.
Yeah, and we're starting with this YouTube commentary, right? From Liv Lane.
Exactly. Right vibes with Liv Lane. The video is called Soft Hearts, Hard Truths, Why Gen Z Can't Handle Real War.
It touches on generational views, especially, after October 7th.
And our mission here, for you listening, is really to get under the surface, to explore the nuances in how Gen Z thinks about conflict.
We want to bring some clarity, maybe some context, without just throwing tons of information at you. Sort of distill what Liv Lane is saying.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe with the distance thing.
Yeah, good point. Liv Lane points out that for many in her generation, war has always been distant.
Like background noise.
Yeah, background noise, headlines, movies, video games. It's not usually like a direct personal thing.
And the implication of that distance, it's interesting. It can sort of lead to this default view that all war is just senseless.
Always avoidable, maybe, regardless of the cost of not acting. Right. And as she says, that's maybe a more comfortable perspective to hold from a college campus or a coffee shop.
That hits home, doesn't it? The idea that this view could be a kind of a luxury.
Yeah, a luxury that's maybe only possible because other people are providing that safety, often unseen people.
Makes you think. So what happens when that distance collapses, when reality hits closer?
Well, that's exactly what Liv describes happening to her after October 7th. Her perspective shifted a lot.
How so? What changed it?
She talks about hearing artillery near Gaza, seeing some of that really raw Hamas body cam footage.
Wow. Even secondhand, those experiences.
They fundamentally changed her understanding of what war actually is, the brutality of it.
It's not abstract anymore, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
She mentioned she can't even watch war films the same way now.
Right, she used 13 hours as an example.
Yeah. What was maybe drama before now feels heavy, real, brutal.
It shows how powerful even that kind of indirect exposure moves it from the head to the gut, almost.
Definitely. Which kind of leads us nicely into her thoughts on that movie, Warfare.
Yes, the one made by veterans.
Exactly. And she acknowledges, the value in veterans showing the truth, the ugly, brutal, and devastating reality, warts and all.
And she saw two main reactions to that honesty.
Yeah, it's like a fork in the road, almost.
Yeah.
Some people felt this deepened gratitude for soldiers.
Understanding their suffering, the loss, the trauma.
Exactly. And then others reacted by going hard the other way.
Yeah.
Towards absolute anti-war stances, pacifism.
So the same horrific reality pushes people in really different directions.
Pretty much. Which brings her to the point about how taking that absolute anti-war stance might come from a position of, privilege.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Her argument is basically saying you're anti-war when you're safe.
Yeah.
It's easy. It costs nothing.
Right. Violence is never the answer. Sounds good when you're not the one being attacked.
Precisely. She contrasts it with her friends in the IDF. They don't really have the luxury, as she puts it, of just saying, I'll opt out of violence.
Yeah, because opting out doesn't stop the threat, does it?
Not necessarily. It highlights that really uncomfortable idea that sometimes protecting people requires fighting back.
Which then leads into her concerns about emotions being weaponized, especially online.
Yeah, she's worried about how easily that happens. You see these graphic images, videos of suffering. They hit you hard, emotionally.
And the danger, she thinks, is jumping straight from that feeling of pain to a moral judgment on the whole war.
Like saying, because there's suffering, even of innocent civilians, the war itself must be unjust. Full stop.
But her point is more complex. She argues that, tragically, civilians do suffer in wars, even necessary ones.
Right. She brings up examples like World War II or the response after 9/11 or even October 7th. The need for self-defense can have horrific consequences, but that doesn't automatically mean the defense itself was wrong.
It's a tough distinction to make.
It really is. And it leads to her point about necessary wars and the cost of inaction.
What does she mean by that?
She puts it quite bluntly. If the only wars you're willing to support are the ones that are clean and painless, then what you're really saying is that you'll never support a defense at all.
Because real war is never clean or painless.
Never. She even talks about her own mixed feelings about the Iraq War as an example of how messy and morally gray these things are.
So the idea is that sometimes not acting, letting evil run wild, as she might say, is the greater injustice, even if acting is costly and horrible.
That seems to be her point. This brings us to the really specific, very current example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Hamas.
Okay. This is obviously very sensitive ground.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Liv acknowledges the heartbreak over the suffering in Gaza, especially the children. That's deeply felt.
There's a but coming, isn't there?
Yes. Her argument, though, is that the only real way to help those children long-term is to actually dismantle Hamas.
Why'd she say that?
She identifies Hamas as the primary cause of their suffering, for turning Gaza into a battlefield, for allegedly using schools for tunnels, using civilians, even children, as shields.
That's a very strong claim, and obviously one side of a very complex conflict.
It is, and she stresses that, in her view, just calling for a ceasefire that leaves Hamas in charge, or, calling for Israel's destruction, that's not actually helping Palestinian kids.
So for her, it's about holding two things at once.
Exactly. Grief for the innocents, but also clarity on who she believes bears responsibility for the situation.
Which then connects to her point about selective outrage.
Right. She tries to distinguish genuine pacifism, opposing all violence, consistently from what she sees as something else.
Something more cynical.
Yeah, maybe using the language of peace and anti-war, as she puts it quite starkly, a kind of cover for hatred of Jews.
And her evidence for that selectivity.
She points to other conflicts, Sudan, DRC, the Uyghurs in China, where she argues many of these same voices are often silent. The intense focus is specifically on Israel.
Raising questions about consistency and maybe underlying motive?
That's the implication. And it ties into the online aspect, the emotional manipulation.
How people can get brainwashed, as she says, by narratives online.
Yeah, narratives that show suffering but maybe strip away the context, creating this very biased view against Israel.
Graphic images bypassing critical thought.
Exactly. Leading to these simple, black and white morality plays where Israel is always the bad.
So what's the antidote to that, in her view?
She says we need to be soft enough to care about suffering, but strong enough to ask hard questions about context, about who's involved, about the why.
And what's driving her personally to say all this?
Well, she mentions friends serving in the IDF. Seeing them accused of things she believes are untrue really fuels her.
And her own experiences, even at a distance.
Yeah, feeling the anxiety of war, even if not in combat. It clearly shaped her perspective profoundly.
So her goal is kind of to bear witness, to honor the sacrifices of those who've seen real war.
That seems to be the heart of it. Sharing her perspective, shaped by these direct and indirect experiences.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've definitely seen some key tensions highlighted by Liv Lane's commentary.
Yeah, like the initial distance from war for many.
Then the shock of reality hitting closer.
The sheer difficulty of judging these conflicts fairly.
And that need to tell the difference between real compassion and maybe biased narratives online.
I think the main takeaway, the one Liv really pushes, is being able to hold two truths at once.
That war is tragic and brutal.
But sometimes, maybe, it's necessary to prevent something even worse. It requires real nuance. Not easy.
Definitely not easy. So maybe a final thought for you listening. How has your own view of conflict been shaped? By your experiences, by the news you see, the things you read online?
Yeah, maybe think about that gap between an immediate emotional reaction, seeing suffering and feeling pain, and making a more informed, considered moral judgment. It's a complex world out there.
Maybe digging a bit deeper into the history, the politics behind current conflict. That might offer a fuller picture beyond just those gut reactions.
Something to reflect on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.